My name is Trisha Blake, and I am the track chair for the collaboration training and education session that we have today. I am very excited to introduce Alex Howland, founder of Virbela, and Mikayla Graham from PwC, who will be taking us through a fireside chat, doing business in the Metaverse. Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you. Great to be here. Hey, everyone. I'm Alex Howland. I'm the founder and president of Virbela. At Virbela, we create virtual worlds, VR experiences for education, business, and events. And on stage with me is Mikayla. How are you, Mikayla?
Great, thank you. I'm Mikayla Graham. I lead innovation for a section of PwC, or PricewaterhouseCoopers, as many of you may have heard it called. And I'm excited to be here.
Awesome.
It's less fireside when you're standing.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Real formal, but.
What's interesting, we actually had matching outfits, but I forgot mine at the hotel, so apologize to everyone. What's a little unique about Mikayla and I is we don't have much of a tech background. We get into this from a little different angle. We're actually organizational psychologists. What is an organizational psychologist?
I think most simply stated, it's just somebody who focuses on the human inside organizations, and how do you improve different processes and procedures, and help people be better at their jobs, and help organizations be better with their people.
There we go. Well said. Well said. So how did you come into PwC as an organizational psychologist and somehow get involved in this XR metaverse space?
So I came in through adult learning, leadership development, and I actually, the first couple of years I was at PwC, I saw this video of a drone flying over a large infrastructure project and sending back real-time data. And the beauty of it from a human perspective is that it was allowing for larger oversight, but you didn't have to be on the job site, so for safety reasons and things like that, and I was absolutely fascinated. And so figuring out how to bring tech and people together has been something that I've pursued since then.
Very cool. And what was that transition within a large organization like PwC to get into a very cool, unique role that you're in?
I think for me, it was just following your passions. When we think about this space, virtual worlds, XR, that we look at how people are connected. And during the pandemic, it was really difficult for people to be connected, and they just felt disengaged from each other, from the corporate culture. And so I, in my role at the time, was driving innovation and looking for ways to connect our people, and came upon virtual worlds. And the idea just took off within the firm.
Very cool. Very cool. Can you give us a sense of what are some of the projects that PwC is doing in this space?
Vaguely, yeah. So we work across a host of different technologies, so from virtual worlds, XR, so your VR, AR, I suppose I don't have to define those for this crowd, AI, I know it's like the big word now, and so we do multiple projects depending on what problems we're trying to solve for our clients. Right now, one of my big focuses is a Virbela campus that we've opened to serve our global network. So we have about 70 countries and approximately 50,000 people working in a virtual world right now to bring and drive larger connection and togetherness, if you will.
Yeah. Can you give us some specific, maybe examples of things you're building in the space or events that you've had? And what are some of the outcomes that you're seeing? What's the reaction from the people?
I think the story that I like to tell from a human standpoint and from a connection standpoint, so right at the end, or I guess if you want to consider the end of the pandemic, we have our team in Shanghai, and they were going into their third lockdown, and they hadn't seen, nobody in Shanghai had seen anybody, if you guys followed the story there. And we hosted an event for about 1,200 people for them to celebrate their end of year. And so we brought everybody together on this campus, and we had put together a bunch of cultural elements and different types of things to celebrate the success that they had that year. And it was the first time that they'd all had been together in over 3 years. And people were just joyous and happy, and they felt like they were connected in a way that they hadn't been in a really long time. In addition to bringing them together, I learned a lot about the Chinese culture. I learned a lot about what they had done that year. So not only were they connecting with each other, but they broadened their perspective and brought people into their culture, and helped other people be, more empathetic and more understanding.
Yeah. I know you're creating some digital twins. Can we talk about some of the digital twins that you're creating of innovation centers and those types of things?
Yeah, so we have built 10 digital twins of the different offices we have all over our globe. And the idea behind that is really to drive engagement, to drive understanding. I think there's a lot of different reasons why we're doing this. One, we do have emission goals that we're trying to reach, net zero goals that we're trying to reach. And so instead of bringing people physically to the center, how do we showcase and highlight the beautiful and unique cultures that we have across each of these? So we have centers in India, we have centers in Shanghai, Kuala Lumpur, Manila, Argentina, and the US. And so as you can imagine, vastly different cultures and vastly different ways of working. And so how do you drive that connection across these spaces? And one of the ways that we're doing that is by replicating the centers and bringing in cultural elements for individuals so that I can go and I can talk to my colleagues, and I can, they can celebrate their culture with me. The other really cool thing is that when you're walking across the campus and you hear people speaking different languages, it feels so real. Like if you're walking by and you're hearing a conversation in Mandarin, or you're hearing a conversation in Spanish, you can still be part of that, and it makes you feel like, you're actually in that space with them.
So cool, so cool. In terms of getting this started within a large organization like PwC, what are some of maybe the lessons you've learned from, the nuts and bolts of it to the deployment and looking at things like, return on investment, and what are some of the things you look for in terms of success criteria?
Well, getting started, it's working a lot with IT security, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. We have a real robust process at PwC. So
theirs is actually pretty easy compared to others.
It was. Yeah. Didn't feel easy. It hurt my soul.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously that's a big part of it, but we had a groundswell of people. We started with one conference, just a way to engage people differently, and just by word of mouth. I mean, we haven't done a lot of broad communications in our firm, but just by word of mouth, people have come to us. We started with one campus, now we have 2, now we have 70 countries, 50,000 people. It speaks for itself, how people are engaging in these spaces, how they're networking, how they're learning, how it feels different. I think from a human standpoint that we all want connection. We all want to be heard. We want to be seen. And at least from the studies, that Zoom just doesn't get you there. And how we have felt in these virtual worlds, in our AR applications, VR applications, you just feel something different. And if you can feel something, you can make change. And I think that's important. Yeah.
It's an interesting time that we're in post-COVID, and companies trying to figure out, are we going back to the office? Are we going hybrid? Are we going to be fully distributed? And whether companies decide to come back to the office or not, the reality is they're global, they're international, they have offices in different places.
I live in South Dakota. I may as well live in the Antarctic, so it's fine.
This idea that you can have kind of a hub and spoke model where you still have your office locations, right? You're creating these digital twins of your innovation centers. Those buildings still exist. People still go to it. But there's now a united place for these people to come together wherever they are in the world that provides this kind of level playing field, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of kind of the future, your future iterations? What are you learning that you're going to iterate on kind of going forward in the next 3 to 5 years in this space, do you think? And what are going to be the impact on the people in the business?
Well, question to the audience, does anybody know the next 3 to 5 years in this space? If you do, I'll talk after the session. So I think, for me, I want to take it back to the beginning. When PwC first published their Demystifying the Metaverse paper, And we talked a lot about the emerging 8 technologies, which included things like XR, AI, 5G. And we talked about how that we knew there was going to be a hype cycle, how we knew there was going to be a trough. And so we're following that pattern, right? Those things are happening. We're actively seeing those things occur. And we're living those things today in this field. Now with AI being front and center, and I think the thing that we're doing now is trying to dispel the myth that these things are mutually exclusive, right? That like AI is now this thing and you can't do any other technology. Like just forget it, just do AI, nothing else. And really trying to tell people that yes, obviously AI has its place, but when you converge these technologies, that's where some of the change happens, right? And that's where you can really make a difference. And so it's not just we do this one thing, we focus on nothing else. It's like how do we bring things together to make a difference in a grander scale? I think for us that's the continued narrative that we're saying, that you can combine different technologies, immersive technologies, and solve different problems, versus you can have one technology and you can do one thing. Don't focus on anything else.
Interesting. We have a number of consulting firms and, firms who bring technology to large organizations, wanting to, sell our products or push our products or whatnot. But a lot of them aren't leaning in the way PwC has in terms of building a team and actually practicing kind of what you preach and those sorts of things. Can you give us a little sense of what PwC is doing in terms of actually building a team in this space and the different skill sets that live on that team?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I know people like to say eat their own dog food, but I'm going to say drink your own champagne because I don't eat dog food. So when we first started implementing this technology, we kind of took a broad look at, what is going to be necessary to support these spaces. And we built an experience team to help support these spaces. And I'm proud to say that it's a team of predominantly young women, non-technology focused, all from the event marketing types of background. Because what we knew is they needed people skills. We knew that they needed to be able to talk to people in a language they understood. And for me, from an organizational psychology standpoint, that like, how often have you been in the room with somebody technical and you're like, what in the hell are they talking about? Like, I don't know, constantly tapping somebody. And so we've built this team of people, of women, to help drive the engagement, to help build new experiences. We have 4 women that sit in Argentina, 3 women and 1 gentleman who sit in India, myself and another woman who sit here in the US. And it has made all the difference, because we talk about we're going to implement a technology, but oftentimes we don't talk about how we're going to support it, how we're going to continue it, how we're going to engage people, how is it going to be meaningful, and how we're going to continue that for, however period of time you plan to have it. And that's what we did. And that's how we look at everything from beginning to end in these types of projects.
Working with this team of women, I can agree that they're a very strong group of women, for sure, indeed. Good team you've built.
That's right.
That's right. Any thoughts in terms of, as we think of the employee experience journey, specific elements where XR technologies, virtual worlds, add particular value?
Well, I think it was really interesting, and I don't know how many of you were in here for the last presentation. I am a huge proponent of equity, and I think oftentimes we frame equity in one way, and a lot of times that's not from a learning perspective, right? And so the folks before us had talked about how, I think her name was Deb, how Deb was no longer going to travel because they'd built these VR experiences, and now they can do exactly what they could do all over the globe, what Deb would have to do in flying around the country. And I think this idea of equity is so important. Whether you're talking about training and getting certain specialized skills to certain parts of a country or certain parts of the world, whether you're talking about equity for people who can, physically go to some place versus those who cannot afford to physically go to some place. I think for me, that's a huge component of it.
Yeah. And it's pretty powerful to see some of the impacts. I had someone with Asperger's on my team, and this is back when we had physical offices in San Diego. And this gentleman couldn't look you in the eye. He couldn't say hello to you. It was very awkward in the physical world. But he was an absolute incredible with our customers in the virtual world. And you never have any idea. We have staff members in wheelchairs that we didn't know were in wheelchairs. The equity piece is pretty powerful. And there are things that I think you need to balance, knowing that it might be more equitable and more accessible for some folks, yet people who might flourish in the physical world might actually struggle a little bit in some of these virtual worlds. So I think we like to think dichotomy, black and white, all equitable or not, but there's, I think, different affordances in these different environments to support different folks and finding what fits best and what the approaches in these environments can bring to make it really.
Well, I think it goes back to the notion of being mutually exclusive, right? If you work in a virtual world or you work in VR or whatever you do, it doesn't mean you can't come together live.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean those things don't exist, right? Everything can coexist. We don't have to live in these polarizations of technology. I think it's how do you use this technology to do your job better, to connect better, to engage better, to make a difference, make a change. And I think people have to stop thinking about I can only be myopic and I can't do anything else. I can only do this one thing. And I think it's a fear-based reaction, right? People are afraid of what they don't know. And I think that they're afraid to experience something, or that they're going to have to make a change, or it's going to take away something from them. And I think my experience has been the more people you can get into these spaces, the greater champions you have. And this is all ranges of ages, because at PwC we have a broad range of people, a broad range of cultures, and I think by and large it's been overwhelmingly positive once you get people in there. And one of my favorite things is when I was at Mobile World Congress in February, and they had a VR booth, and I don't know if you all have experienced somebody being in VR for the first time, and they're and they're smiling, and there's such a childlike wonder about it that is so amazing. And if we could all just get a little bit of that back,
yeah.
And kind of set aside just the, toughness of our days, and playfulness, it's just a really great experience.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned some ESG elements. Are you doing anything specific kind of in that space? I think there's lots of opportunity for simulation and.
Yeah. We are doing a ton in the ESG space, but specifically we built in our campus a way to engage our clients through virtual worlds and learning. And so obviously net zero goals, how we all can make small changes in order to impact, I'm going to say climate change, and I don't want to conflate that term with ESG because those mean separate things, but we're focusing on the climate change environment part, the E and ESG. And so we built this experience that allows people to get into the space, talk to one another, learn about how different climate actions impact different scenarios. And then we built a gamified piece of it where it's almost like an escape room where you answer different questions and you can walk through it. And people really enjoy that, right? When you learn without knowing that you're learning, that's really cool. And again, it goes back to the equity piece. Some of us don't learn in traditional fashions. Some of us learn differently. I am a neurodiverse person, so sitting and listening to somebody talk for 50 minutes, I'm gone. You lose me, right? But if I can engage in different ways and in the content differently, then I'm great. And I think that is another really important part of it.
Yeah. You mentioned, you personally got a lot of things snowballing at PwC in terms of broad use case and now tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, just even in your organization, touching some of these tools and having experiences. Any recommendations to folks in the audience who might be work for a corporation on how to get something started in the space?
Call me. I think it's just being vulnerable enough to take a risk, right? They're like, nobody is saying implement these things in some sort of grand fashion, buy all this stuff, do all these things, but it's really important that we build the tools that we're going to need for tomorrow. And you have to start somewhere, right? You have to start somewhere, and maybe it's like one small pilot program somewhere, whether it's with a virtual world or with XR, or you're talking about looking at real estate through AR. But we have to start somewhere, because I don't think there's anybody in this room that disagrees. And if there is, sorry, but that this is here, and it's going to continue, right? Like, this isn't going to change. It's not going to go away, irrespective of the highs and the lows and this and that. I mean, the gentleman this morning that opened up, he talked about, this is the 14th year for AWE, and like 14 years ago, I don't know if, a lot of people even knew what XR was, or more broadly. And so it's only gotten bigger, and it's only going to continue to get bigger.
Yeah, very good. Well, I've had a chance to ask you a lot of questions. Now's the time for the audience to ask Mikayla or myself any questions. We have a few minutes here.
Any questions? I see a question in the back.
I can't see anything.
I got you.
Eyes,
That's why you have a track chair.
Thank you. Thanks again for the conference. I would love to ask a question regarding the equity piece, because I think it's really important. But I would love to understand more about the friction that you've encountered when it comes to actually getting the headsets or the different pieces of hardware that are required to get those folks into a table where they may not be able to attend if it's not flying or just being in person on that event. Thanks.
So I think there's a couple of different scenarios there. With the virtual world that we have, we did work through our IT teams. PwC is unique in its setup that we are member firms, and so we don't have like one singular IT entity. And so we had to work with different entities to get it deployed and work with those individual territories. And so it does take a little bit of work and tenacity to get it done. Anybody that's worked with IT security, but I think it has been so beneficial that the reward definitely outweighs the effort that we put into it. From a VR headset standpoint, I think we've used it in kind of a multitude of ways, whether it's having like a centralized hub and shipping them out, or each of our territories having a few, and people being able to experiment with them. The goal for us is just exposure. Getting people exposed to it, getting people interested, getting them to see the benefit of it, and then figuring out different use cases. So it's not just us saying this is great. It's we're going to people and they're trying it and they're like, this is great. You should do this, right? Because you can't think of all of the use cases.
Any other questions? Yes. One question, please.
When you are working with your clients, do you find that they are able to roll this out pretty easily? Or what are your best recommendations for your client? Like, who's the best counterpart for you? Because there's people that use it, and then there's people that have to pay for it. And so who's your best counterpart and best advocate?
I think it depends on what your use case is in the organization, right? If you're using it for training and development, if you're using it for DEI, if you're using it to for architecture companies to kind of scale things and model, I think it really depends on who your best advocate is or who you go to in the organization. I think that when you can get people into the technology, that's probably the best approach, and get them to sit and to see it and to understand it. Because it's hard to talk about this stuff, in kind of abstract, right? I can tell you what I'm seeing and I can tell you what it feels like, and but until you get people into it, it's hard for them to really understand. And then once you get them into it, they're generally like, oh yeah, I totally get this. And I'm not Pollyannish in the sense that it is difficult, especially with headsets. People are like, do I have to wear this? And there's a lot of vulnerability that goes into putting that on in a room where you've not tried something on before, and you're like, people are looking at me, I've got this thing on my face, and so there are challenges that we've had to overcome. But I think the more that you can be open and honest with them about, okay, this is what this experience is going to be like. I like to talk a lot about my experience because VR has oftentimes made me nauseous, and that's a common thing. And so, when you tell people your story with it, they seem to relax a little bit, in that honesty and that like, okay, you're here with me.
Excellent.
Great, thank you. That is the last question that we can have for this session, but I do want to invite you to show some love to Alex and Mikayla
Thank
for
you.
this fireside chat.
Thank you.